Hello there. It's been a while, hasn't it? Hi there. If you're new here for some reason, I'm Loremaster of Sotek, and welcome back to a series I know people have been waiting for since, it's been a hot minute. 10 months since the last Q&A. So I think it's about, bye Chloe, I think it's about time that we get back to it, don't you? Before we hop into it, I think a few things I want to go over real quick. We're trying to get back to getting stuff that people have been really waiting for back on the channel. The next episode of Who Would Win should be going out hopefully later this week. It's in editing, so it's already been recorded and everything. All of my decisions made, so I hope you guys are really looking forward to see who comes out on top in those match outs, and we will see for that. But for the Q&A, I thought I would just do it with me, with maybe some pictures thrown in occasionally. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just like the last Q&A a really long time ago, we are going to split this into parts, just because I think that works a lot better. So without further ado, let's get started. So our first question today comes from Mike the Guy, who asks, why don't the dwarves use any type of beasts of war? Is it a pride thing for the dwarves? From what I can tell, every other faction / race uses beasts for war. Okay, so the main reason that dwarves don't use animals when it comes to war or most anything that doesn't involve like traveling wagons is because dwarves don't trust them. The thing about dwarves is when it comes to their technology, their culture, or anything that has to do with their lives, they like things that are very tried and true and proven and have effectively been used for thousands of years, and they know exactly how it's going to perform, exactly how it's going to work, and they like things to be very reliable. Animals are not that reliable. Horses will pitch you from their back. The animal might, get scared and bolt. Maybe it'll get really stubborn. Maybe it'll get sick. Maybe it'll have any number of issues. So they don't really trust them. And dwarves are very designed around a philosophy as well of using their natural advantages, such as their weight and their stock size, to basically plant their feet on the ground, raise their shield, have their axe up, and effectively being an unmovable boulder. And they can't do that from the back of an animal. In dwarven culture, there's a saying that's literally a dwarf's place is on the ground. A dwarf's place is with his own 2 feet on solid earth or rock, where he can be sturdy and defend alongside the shield brothers. So the big thing about it is that ultimately animals just don't synergize well with the way dwarves live their lives, and they are almost a direct opposite force to the way dwarves believe you should handle yourself. Elves build relationships with their steeds, whether it's eagles, horses, or dragons. There's a sense of trust there, unless you're the forces of chaos or something, where you're trying to just break the creature's will to serve your own. But no matter what, there is some fundamental sense of trust in putting your life in the hands of something that's not you, a creature that is ultimately foreign / alien to you, and at any moment something could happen where it gets taken out by a stray arrow, or it freaks out and bolts, or it's too stubborn, or it misunderstands a command. The dwarves refuse to risk it. Too risky. Our next question comes from Display Name, who asks, do the dwarves sleep the same amount normal humans do? He has 3 questions. How do the dwarves keep their entire holds fed? And do dwarves ever have wars with one another, and how do they mark their territory? Okay, so the first question, if a dwarf wants to remain in peak physical condition, then they need to sleep as much as we do. They follow pretty much the same fundamental laws of how much sleep is required to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So, optimally they'll sleep 8 hours, give or take. However, the dwarves are much more sturdy. They're kind of made of sterner stuff than we are, both physically and mentally. And because of that, dwarves can go much longer than we can with little to no sleep, with relatively few repercussions, at least for a longer period of time. Obviously, if a dwarf doesn't sleep for long enough, then sleep deprivation will begin to have very serious effects on their health, such as, hallucinations, difficulty staying awake, they'll become physically weaker, all sorts of stuff. They'll get very sick, but they can handle it much better than we can. So they follow kind of the same rules we do physically, and it's the same thing for like starvation. But dwarves are just naturally tougher than men, and it takes much more and typically a longer period of time for them to start feeling the serious adverse effects that we would. A dwarf can probably go a good 24 hours without sleep and still be in pretty prime condition. Most humans, once you start hitting that 16 to 18 hour mark, you start to run into problems. Kind of serious problems. Second question, how do dwarf holds feed themselves? So dwarf holds are self-contained ecosystems, almost entirely. Every dwarf hold was originally a mine that the dwarves set up in a mountain, and then it slowly basically expands in all directions. So it expands up into the slopes, deep into the earth. They begin to take over the land outside of the peak. But when it comes to food specifically, they rely on a couple different sources. One is that there are natural mushroom caves or caverns that can be found deep within certain caverns and natural formations in the mountain ranges that they farm in, and many of these mushrooms can be used quite successfully for food. Obviously, they don't rely on the same mushrooms that greenskins do. Greenskins rely on mushrooms that cause crazy hallucinogenic effects and other stuff like that, or flesh shrooms, which for the most part are undeveloped greenskins. So greenskins are basically just, hardcore cannibals, but greenskins will eat anything. Dwarves, though, they rely on more natural mushrooms that are particularly healthy. They also, one of the biggest things is they have what are called hruki. And hruki are these mountain goats. It's a breed of mountain goat that have they're the closest thing the dwarves have to pets. And these mountain goats are kept in herds, and they live among the peaks because they're very well naturally adjusted to living on those high slopes and being able to cross super steep chasms with no issue whatsoever. And dwarves farm them for meat, wool, milk, and obviously they make cheese out of that, stuff like that. So they use that, and then dwarves also, along their mountains, there's notable spots where there's exposed soil, or maybe the dwarves have brought up soil. They basically find kind of a flat expanse, and the dwarves will develop a farm there where they grow wheat or whatever it is you use to make beer, so hops, I guess, and stuff like that. They have a lot of these really well hidden farms scattered all over the place, and scores of fields. If the dwarves were inclined to show you for whatever reason, they could take you through their hold, and many of these secret fields can only be accessed from within the hold itself or by something that would be flying, which is why dwarves have to have very good defenses against wyverns and other griffins and other airborne predators who might try and go into those fields and mess them up or hunt the goats. But that's why dwarf rangers or farmhands will hang out up there and will take care of those places and defend them from natural predators. That being said, all these places tend to be really well hidden by using trickery of natural terrain or dwarven runes or what have you. But on top of that, they also trade a lot. The primary reason dwarves even started trading with men, about 3,000 years before the modern age, was for farming. They traded with men to grow their crops, and they gave men weapons or black powder or steel, and they taught them tricks of the trade. And the only thing the dwarves really wanted from men was food. just because men have a lot more land and a lot more space to grow a lot more stuff. And that's also why the dwarves trade with the halflings as well, and they have like a very amicable relationship with men. And that's where that relationship started. But all dwarf holds are self-sustainable. Outside of the fact that they tend to have huge warehouses that can keep food fresh for very long periods of time, which is why when you fight against the dwarves, laying siege to a dwarf hold is probably the least advisable thing you can do. And that's even assuming that the dwarf hold doesn't have like gyrocopter landing pads to send, messages to other holds, or doesn't have like an operating underway so that an entire dwarf army, thousands of DAWI strong, can come marching up underneath you. But they're self-sustaining enough. Many dwarf holds have like their own underwater lakes or caverns of water, or they hang out near the source of natural springs or underground rivers. So like dwarves are very, very self-sustaining when it comes to, like, when something bad happens outside, they just seal their doors up tight, just lock them shut, and they have no problem waiting stuff out. Then the last question is, do dwarves ever fight each other? How do they mark their territories? So generally, when it comes to marking territory, that almost explicitly always falls under dwarf. A mine will be set up in a mountain under the decree of wherever that dwarf clan came from, whoever the clan in charge of the mission is. And they will set up a mine, and that mine will slowly start to expand outwards, and eventually it'll reach a point where it becomes a proper hold. And once that happens, then there can begin negotiations for like kingship or vague independence. For instance, all the dwarves that went to the Grey Mountains, they all went there and set up mines in like Karak Norn or Karakirn, or all those mines that you see out there, all those dwarven settlements. And the thing about them is that eventually they got large enough where the dwarves had like an empire in the Grey Mountains and the Black Mountains, or the Middle Mountains as well, all three. And they eventually reached out to the World's Edge Mountain dwarves, and they were like, all right, we are big enough, we can self-sustain, we don't need you guys, and we can declare independence if we want. And they did for a good long while, which caused some issues. But as far as do dwarves have wars with another, not really. Sometimes there have been times in dwarven history where two holds have had some series of grudges play out between them. Maybe they were contesting over maybe there was a dispute over border territory, or a dispute, if you have two holds in the same mountain range, let's say like Karak Kadrin and Zufbar, and there was a mine founded kind of nearby the middle ground between the two, there could be an escalation of tension over who exactly has rights to that mine and the minerals that come out of it. And that could escalate to the point that war breaks out between the two. It is incredibly rare and nearly non-existent in the modern age. Back before the War of Vengeance, it happened more often because the dwarves were basically invincible and didn't have any realistic threats because their holds were sealed up tight along with the underway. So like the Greenskins and the Skaven weren't a viable threat to them. And chaos had been pushed out of the world, and many believed it had been defeated forever. Trade with the elves was good. And at that point, yes, there were dwarf holds trading blows with one another. But in the modern age, when the dwarves are essentially a dying race, they can't afford civil wars like that. And they know that. That being said, within a hold, it is not unusual to see clans come to disagreements that might result in violence. But deathly violence or, fighting to kill, virtually not unheard of, unless it is an incredibly extreme situation. All right, our next question is from the warrior Draganta, who says, "Hey Sotek, why am I rolling that R? Hey Sotek, I love your channel, so I was wondering why the dwarves are so conservative when it comes to technological innovation and dealing with other races. Furthermore, in a video by Arch Warhammer, I recall him saying that dwarves are resistant to magic because they believe it to be so, and upon digging, I found that dwarven wizards were once a thing in earlier editions of the game. Can you share what you know about them, please? Also, if they did use magic like Imperial Magisters, why would that result in them turning to stone? Thank you. Okay, so... Okay, let's break this down. First of all, Arch Warhammer is like way off base. That's not even... That is... No. No. Dwarves are not resistant to magic because they believe like a Disney princess that they're immune to magic. That's not how this works. No. Absolutely not. Like greenskins almost have something similar to that, but that's even then more a 40k thing. In fantasy, that's not how that works at all. So the way it actually works is that when the old ones came to the planet, they created a series of races after some shenanigans, like moving the planet closer to the sun, breaking up the continents, yada yada. So the old ones were trying to create a race that could defeat chaos. And the thing about chaos is basically magic without restriction or boundaries that goes completely wild, and it interacts with the emotions of living creatures to become something really ugly. And so the old ones were trying to create a race that could resist the corruption of chaos while also being able to destroy it. So, for instance, the first race they created were the Lizardmen, but the Lizardmen were not designed to defeat chaos. They were designed to be custodians of the planet. They were designed to wipe out the undesirable races, clean up any, fallen empires, make sure that the new races that were being created were protected, yada, yada, yada. So, the first race that was created were the Elves. And the Elves were designed to be very innately attached to magic, because it was hoped that they would have a very powerful innate relationship with magic, so they would be able to control it and manipulate it to the point that they could basically beat chaos at its own game. Well, spoiler, that didn't work out. The old ones looked into the elves and they realized that the elves were too attached to magic by a long shot, and because of that innate relationship, the elves were incredibly susceptible to corruption of the spirit. So the elves ended up, and the way it primarily manifested itself is that the elves were these very long-lived creatures that have a very natural inclination towards incredible arrogance and self-importance, and they tend to they're also way too easily obsessed with incredible sensations or pursuing indulgences. And the old ones looked at that and were like, whoa, that's not going to work out. So they decided to keep working on them, had the Salon teach them magic, yada, yada, yada. And they put them on Ulthuan and were like, all right, that didn't work. So that was a failure. So then they created the dwarves. So instead of raising up creatures that had a very innate relationship and had magic interwoven into their very being, instead the old ones did the opposite. They created a race that was so innately bound to the earth itself that they were incredibly resistant to magic. They were basically anathema to magic. It rebounded off their flesh, and it was like fire as to water. So because of that, they thought that would make it so that the dwarves were perfect for dealing with chaos because they would be able to shrug it off and would be immune to its corruption and effects. However, once again, that created a problem because the dwarves were so immutable, were so rigid in structure and design that it affected their emotions as well and their spiritual nature. So they also fell to corruption, in that because they're such earthly beings, they're very, very stubborn, and they're horribly prone to immutable perspectives like honor and tradition, and they very rarely have the ability or desire to budge on any notion, regardless of the risk or the cost. In addition to that, because they were essentially created from the earth itself, they have an obsession with the earth, digging and diving deeper and deeper, and they have a very deep flaw in that they're incredibly greedy creatures, deep down. And that could be exploited to become something truly dark. So the older ones are like, oh, that's not going to work either. And then, they create some other races. But, so, to answer your question, that's why dwarves are naturally resistant to magic. They were designed to be so. They're made by the earth itself, and the earth is what grounds magic. It's what allows someone to dispel magic or disperse the winds themselves. When a wizard fires a spell at a dwarf, the reason the dwarf is able to so casually disrupt the magic is because the magic slaps into the dwarf and just redirects into the earth. Or when you fight a rune lord or most wizards, the reason they use staves is because the staff is meant as a conduit to channel the magic itself into the earth, where it will dissipate harmlessly into the planet itself. That's what makes like the Slann such horrifyingly powerful wizards, is that the Slann can actually use geomancy. And the Slann know how to rely on magic that's not the winds of magic. They can use the very magic life of the planet shifting itself, kind of like alchemy almost from Full Metal Alchemist, where they kind of use like the natural energies of the earth to use alchemy. The Slann can use that to cast geomancy, which is what makes it such a powerful form of magic. But in any event, this makes dwarves nearly immune to magic. However, when dwarves cast magic, that becomes a problem. So, contrary to what some people may think, because a lot of people just sort of cut to the chase on it, it's not that dwarves cannot use magic. Dwarves do have the ability to manipulate magic just like anybody else. It's just that for them, the risk is much, much higher. So, natural dwarves use magic to create runes, which we'll talk about on a later question, because there's a ton of questions about rune crafting, so we'll get to those when the time comes. For the DAWI that becomes sorcerers, like the sorcerer prophets of the DAWI Zar, the Chaos Dwarves, they use magic in a more traditional sense. The problem is that when they use magic, when you cast magic, it flows through your body and you shape it to your will and unleash it. But, like, for instance, most wizards can only shape certain aspects of magic, one of the 8 winds, right? Or sometimes they'll mix it up and make something really messy out of it, like greenskins or chaos sorcerers do. But in any event, when a dwarf tries to channel magic through them and it rebounds, which is a miscast. A miscast is when you lose control of the winds of magic and it basically rebounds against you, which most wizards can kind of shove it off to the side so that basically they just lose control of the magic, or they're able to, the rebound will only make them have a nosebleed, or maybe it'll knock them out for a little bit. Sometimes it can be way more extreme. But for a dwarf, the instant that magic rebounds, the part of their body that the magic rebounds to, the sorcerer prophets of Hashut are very, very good at causing a miscast to rebound to a specific part of their body, like a hand or an arm or a leg. It turns your body to stone, because dwarves are earthly creatures that were created from the earth itself, and they are so anathema to magic that the reaction of magic being completely unleashed upon them just turns them to stone. And it's actually pretty horrific. And I just realized I have a pill here I have to take. If you want to see this actually take place in a story, then I would recommend finding the book called on the Black Library website. I'm hoping to get a sponsor soon through Audible or Amazon or something, so people can buy books and we can go over them. But this book, which was re-released as Masters of Stone and Steel, it was originally called the Dwarf Omnibus, but now it's called Masters of Stone and Steel. Pick up this book, and there is a not this book, the War of Vengeance series. Sorry, my bad. The War of Vengeance trilogy. Pick up the War of Vengeance trilogy, and there is a dwarf who uses magic in, I won't say who or why, because I won't spoil it, but there is a dwarf who turns to stone. And it goes very much into detail about how that happens. So let's keep moving. So next we have Faba, who asks, how physically strong are dwarves? For instance, how many orcs could a regular dwarf warrior be able to take on? What's the toughest blow the average dwarf can withstand? Okay, so dwarves on average are fairly strong. They're roughly the same as a man who lives a life that they would. So what I mean is that what aids the perception to readers or people in the Warhammer world that dwarves are stronger than men is that DAWI are very powerfully built, thanks to the fact that they're super condensed, squat figures. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to lift weights or like wrestle or play football, American football, sorry, or try to like fight somebody. But whenever you want to use a feat of strength, the thing you do is you plant your feet and you get yourself low into a squat position, and that can provide you with oodles of strength. Not necessarily for fighting, but if you want to like tackle somebody and just freaking, triple flip them over your head. So the thing about dwarves is they're naturally designed like that. They don't have they don't have to do any of that bending down or getting into a stance crap. They're just built that way. And on top of that, they're just as heavy as we are. So dwarves have just as much muscle mass as a man, but instead, or like a good 6 foot something guy, like, someone like me, 6'1", 6'2", but imagine taking all the muscle mass of like a hardcore miner who's worked every day of his life and is still in his prime after 100 years of hardcore exercise, and take all that muscle mass from a 6'2" guy and condense it into a guy that's only maybe 5'5", but he's about 2 feet wider. And that's why dwarves are perceived as very, very strong. They're just these super broad squat figures that are perfectly designed for feats of physical strength. However, when it comes to like a physical contest against an orc, for instance, the thing is that a dwarf warrior is evenly matched to an orc. Orcs are much bigger and they're much more ape-like in their design, in that they tend to have oversized upper bodies with really, really long hanging arms and like really big broad heads and shoulders. But their lower bodies tend to be a little not as impressive. And dwarves can go toe-to-toe with them, and it's like a fair contest of strength. Orcs traditionally might be a little bit stronger than a dwarf, but a dwarf has the skill, and his body is better designed for those kinds of feats and contests. But dwarves and orcs are perfectly like designed to go toe-to-toe. Men would lose to either side, typically on average. If you're just taking like the average specimen of each species. For the toughest blow they could stand, that's really subjective, in my opinion, and almost impossible to say with any degree of accuracy. Dwarves, because of their structure and the fact that they have much more muscle mass compared to the average human, like inch for inch, they are better designed to take hits than people are. And they're much tougher than we are. That being said, so like if you tried to punch them or hit them with something that wouldn't necessarily be lethal to a man, they would take it way better. And if you hit them with something that was like moderately lethal to a person, like maybe you hit them really hard in the face, to like try and break their skull, or you tried to like snap their neck, or you tried to stab them or hack them with a weapon, they're much tougher than we are and are more than likely going to be able to take it. Their bones are thicker and denser. They have more muscle mass, stuff like that. Their skulls are notably thicker. So like trying to kill a dwarf through blunt trauma, not the best plan. However, if you're just trying to kill a dwarf by like shooting them with a gun, or like blowing them up, or dropping, having a giant go on them, then they'll die just as easily as a man. So hopefully that answers that question, but that's pretty subjective. Hope that helps. Kaki asks, nice video as always, thank you. What is the normal dwarf diet? Okay, this will be maybe the last one, but this one I'm actually really excited to talk about. because a lot of people wanted to know about dwarven food. So let's get into it. I would love to see some people actually try and make recipes out of these. So the dwarf diet typically consists of hard but very famously absorbent bread baked from wheat fields that they keep along the peaks or trade with humans and halflings for. And their bread, there's not like any super crazy specifics about it. We know it's like wheat based, but it's designed to basically sop up beer or soups and stuff like that. The typical meat, milk, and cheese that dwarves consume all come from hruki, which are mountain goats. And dwarves also rely on copious amounts of gorog. And gorog, which is dwarven, or Khazalid for ale, or dwarven beer as well, are amazingly brewed creations that kind of have magical properties because they require like decades, if not centuries, most of the time to create, and there's a lot of like crazy mythical ingredients they use, and a lot of the distilling they use is very like crazy, and I have no idea if it's based in real science or not. But dwarf beer is so potent, not only does it make you very drunk, but dwarves are very, very staunch supporters of the idea that you can healthily live off just dwarf beer alone for like your life. And many like when dwarves go on the march to battle, they usually don't take food with them. They just take beer. Kegs and kegs of beer. Because the only thing a dwarf needs on the march to be in perfect fighting shape is a good dwarf beer. Beyond that, they have throngl, which are wild cave mushrooms that are typically found at the back of caverns that the dwarves know to go picking for them. That's the Khazalid word for them, throngl. There are also many types of special meals. There's throngl, which is dragon stew that you accent with cave mushrooms and you let marinate in strong ale. Obviously, that's kind of a rare treat because it requires killing a dragon, but that happens more often than people might think because they at least happen often enough they have a unique word for it. There's Kolgur, which Kolgur is the art slash speciality of cooking troll meat into making like actually pretty good food. It's like its own form of it's almost like it's like a special form of chef style is Kolgur, but it's cooked troll. Which obviously, once troll has been roasted, it's safe to eat, but do not eat it before then if you don't want to become Grom the Paunch too. Then there's curry. Curry is, which is spelled Kuri because it's Khazalid. Curry is slang for basically when dwarf rangers are on patrols. Curry is literally like they make a meal out of whatever the hell they can find and just throw that shit together. And the only notable thing is it tends to almost always be accented by like special kinds of wild berries that are really easy to find on mountain slopes and paths. Beyond that, when it comes to the desperate situations of a dwarven diet, so like what miners rely on or iron breakers tend to have with them in case of emergency, is they always have chuff and gibble. So chuff, you keep under your mining hat or your helmet, depending on what your station is. And chuff is very, very old cheese. Hruki cheese, which of course is goat cheese. And it's very old and apparently does not taste very good, but it's known that it will keep you going. It's designed to taste bad because you obviously want to eat as little as possible to ration it because it's only used for emergencies. And then gibble literally stands for like food that's left over in your beard because dwarves have really big beards. So some dwarves strategically rely on gibble in emergency situations so they can basically like forge through their beard for leftovers. All right, so I think that will be enough for episode 1. All the answers have already been written out, so there's going to be an episode every day for the remainder. See, that was 2 pages. We got 18 more pages to go. So there's going to be a lot of these They're always going to be roughly 30 minutes long. We will just keep going. Every day, you're going to be getting answers to your dwarf questions that have been stewing for almost a year. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.